The conference room smelled like stale coffee and broken dreams when Rick Thompson looked me dead in the eye and said the words that would eventually cost him everything. "Sarah, let's be honest here. Women just don't belong in high-stakes business. It's nothing personal, it's just biology." His voice carried the casual confidence of a man who'd never questioned his own assumptions. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I was holding the quarterly reports that showed my campaigns had generated 60% of the agency's revenue. But apparently, that wasn't enough to overcome my chromosomes. The silence that followed felt like standing in the eye of a hurricane. Marcus Johnson shifted uncomfortably in his chair, suddenly fascinated by his smartphone screen. Lisa Rodriguez from HR froze with her pen halfway to her notepad, her eyes darting between Rick and me like she was watching a car accident in slow motion. The morning sun streaming through the 20th floor windows of Summit Marketing Solutions suddenly felt too bright, illuminating every uncomfortable detail of what would become the most expensive sentence Rick Thompson ever spoke. It started 5 years earlier when I walked into Summit Marketing Solutions, wearing my lucky navy blazer, and carrying a portfolio thick with ideas that would transform how tech companies talk to their customers. Rick Thompson had built his agency from scratch in downtown Denver, turning a cramped office above a coffee shop into a sleek operation spanning 3 floors of a glass tower in the business district. He hired me straight out of grad school at the University of Colorado, where I'd earned my MBA in marketing with a focus on digital transformation. Those first months felt like drinking from a fire hose. I absorbed everything about the industry, from programmatic advertising to influencer partnerships, while Rick taught me the fundamentals of client relationships. He was different then, or maybe I was too eager to notice the warning signs. He praised my strategic thinking and called my campaign concepts innovative. When I developed a social media strategy that tripled engagement for a struggling e-commerce client, he took me to lunch at the Brown Palace Hotel and told me I had real potential in this business. My childhood in San Francisco had prepared me for working twice as hard to prove myself. My parents immigrated from Taiwan with engineering degrees and restaurant dreams, eventually building a small chain of authentic noodle shops throughout the Bay Area. They taught me that excellence wasn't optional, and that success came to those who outworked everyone around them. I applied this philosophy to every campaign, every client meeting, every late night spent perfecting presentation decks while my colleagues went home to their families. By my second year at Summit, I was managing accounts worth over $2 million annually. The tech startup scene in Denver was exploding, and somehow I'd developed an instinct for understanding how founders thought and what made their audiences click. I could translate complex software features into compelling stories that drove conversions. My campaigns for CloudVault, a data security startup, increased their customer acquisition by 300% in 6 months. When Streamline ERP needed to pivot their messaging after a failed product launch, I crafted a comeback narrative that restored investor confidence and secured their Series B funding. Rick started inviting me to more important meetings. I sat in on client presentations, contributed to strategic planning sessions, and even helped pitch new business. When our biggest client, TechFlow Systems, threatened to leave over disappointing campaign results from our senior team, Rick asked me to take over their account personally. I spent 3 weeks rebuilding their entire digital presence from the ground up, creating a content strategy that positioned them as thought leaders in automation software. Within 2 months, their website traffic had doubled and their sales qualified leads increased by 400%. The promotion to senior marketing strategist felt inevitable. I was already doing the work, managing a team of 3 junior associates and overseeing accounts that generated 40% of the agency's revenue. My direct reports looked up to me, frequently asking for advice on everything from campaign optimization to career development. When Rachel Morrison, a recent graduate from Colorado State, joined our team, she specifically requested to work under my supervision because she'd heard about my reputation for developing innovative strategies. But something changed during my 3rd year. Marcus Johnson joined Summit after completing his MBA at Northwestern, and Rick's attention shifted almost immediately. Marcus had the kind of easy confidence that came from growing up in boardrooms, his father being a prominent venture capitalist in Chicago. He spoke fluently about market dynamics and industry trends, often referencing conversations with executives at companies I'd only dreamed of working with. Rick seemed mesmerized by Marcus's ability to network effortlessly at industry events, collecting business cards like they were trading cards. The warning signs emerged slowly, like cracks in a foundation that you don't notice until the building starts to sway. Marcus was assigned to shadow me on the Cloud Vault account, supposedly to learn our processes, but his questions felt more like interrogations. He wanted to understand every detail of my strategic approach, from audience segmentation to creative development timelines. When I presented our quarterly results to the leadership team, Marcus would ask follow-up questions that showcased his business school vocabulary, using phrases like customer lifetime value optimization and, quote, omni-channel attribution modeling. Rick began including Marcus in client meetings where I wasn't present, explaining that it was important for him to develop relationships across our portfolio. I discovered this accidentally when Tom Bradley, the CEO of one of my longest-standing clients, mentioned how much he enjoyed meeting with Marcus to discuss future campaign directions. I'd been managing Tom's account for 3 years, and he'd never made a major decision without consulting me first. The conversation felt like finding out your best friend had been hanging out with someone else behind your back. The real turning point came when Streamline ERP requested a comprehensive rebranding campaign worth nearly $500,000. I'd maintained their account for 18 months, delivering consistent results and building genuine trust with their executive team. When they expressed interest in expanding our partnership, I naturally assumed I'd be leading the project. Instead, Rick announced during our Monday morning meeting that Marcus would spearhead the initiative as part of his development into a senior role. I asked to speak with Rick privately after the meeting, my stomach churning with a mixture of confusion and indignation. His office overlooked the Denver skyline, with motivational quotes about success and leadership scattered across the walls like corporate propaganda. I sat across from his massive oak desk, trying to maintain my composure while my career felt like it was slipping through my fingers. I don't understand the decision about Streamline ERP, I said, keeping my voice steady and professional. I've managed their account since day one, and they specifically requested me for this project. Rick leaned back in his leather chair, his expression a mixture of condescension and impatience. Sarah, you've done excellent work on the tactical side, but this project requires strategic leadership. Marcus brings a different perspective, a broader vision for how we can expand the relationship. What kind of perspective? I pressed, genuinely trying to understand his reasoning. My campaigns have consistently exceeded their performance targets, and their team trusts my judgment completely. It's about presence, he said, gesturing vaguely as if the concept was too abstract for me to grasp. Marcus has a natural ability to command a room, to inspire confidence in clients who are making significant investments. That's the kind of leadership we need for accounts of this magnitude. The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, with Rick offering increasingly vague explanations about Marcus's potential and my need to focus on execution rather than strategy. I left his office feeling like I'd been speaking a different language, unable to reconcile his assessment with the objective results I'd delivered consistently for 5 years. Over the following months, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Marcus was elevated to associate director while I remained a senior strategist, despite managing larger accounts and delivering superior results. He was invited to industry conferences while I stayed behind to handle day-to-day operations. When potential clients visited our office, Rick would introduce Marcus as his rising star, and me as someone who, quote, keeps the trains running on time. The frustration built like pressure in a steam engine, threatening to explode every time I watched Marcus take credit for strategies I'd developed or relationships I'd cultivated. During team meetings, he would present ideas that were barely modified versions of campaigns I'd created, seasoning them with business school jargon and presenting them as breakthrough innovations. Rick would nod appreciatively, praising Marcus's fresh thinking and entrepreneurial mindset. I started documenting everything. Every email exchange, every campaign result, every client testimonial went into a folder on my laptop labeled Professional Development. I told myself I was building a case for my next performance review, but deep down I knew I was preparing for something bigger. The inequality had become too obvious to ignore, and I refused to continue accepting explanations that made no logical sense. The breaking point arrived on a Tuesday morning in March, when Rick called an emergency meeting to announce a major organizational restructuring. Summit had landed a contract with a Fortune 500 technology company looking to modernize their entire digital marketing approach. The project was worth over $2 million and would likely lead to additional opportunities within their corporate family. As we gathered in the main conference room, I felt a mixture of excitement and anticipation. This was exactly the kind of high-profile opportunity I'd been working toward for 5 years. The chance to prove myself on a national stage with unlimited resources and visibility. I'd already started brainstorming campaign concepts, imagining how we could leverage their massive audience and established brand equity to create something revolutionary. Rick stood at the head of the polished conference table, his expressions serious and professional. I'm pleased to announce that we've been selected to lead the Digital Transformation Initiative for Titan Technologies. This represents the largest contract in Summit's history and will require our absolute best work. The room buzzed with energy as team members exchanged excited glances and whispered comments about the prestige of working with such a recognizable brand. I could already see myself presenting campaign strategies to C-suite executives, my ideas helping to shape how millions of consumers interacted with their products. Marcus will be serving as the primary point of contact and strategic lead for this engagement. Rick continued, his words hitting me like a physical blow. He'll be working directly with their CMO and executive team to develop the overall campaign architecture. I felt the blood drain from my face as the implications sank in. This wasn't just another project assignment. This was a career-defining opportunity that would establish whoever led it as a major player in the industry. Marcus would have direct access to decision-makers at one of the country's most influential companies, building relationships that could last decades and open doors I might never get another chance to walk through. The meeting continued with discussions about team assignments and project timelines, but I barely heard the details. My mind was racing through 5 years of superior performance, trying to identify what I could have done differently to earn this opportunity. I thought about the late nights spent perfecting campaign strategies, the weekends sacrificed to meet impossible deadlines, the personal relationships I'd neglected in pursuit of professional excellence. When the meeting ended, I approached Rick's office with a determination born from years of accumulated frustration. This time, I wasn't asking for clarification or seeking to understand his perspective. I needed answers that made sense. Explanations based on merit rather than mystical concepts like presence and natural leadership ability. Rick, I need to understand your decision about the Titan Technologies project, I said, closing his office door behind me. My portfolio includes the 3 largest accounts we've ever managed, and my campaign results consistently outperform everyone else on the team. He looked up from his computer screen with an expression of mild irritation, as if I was interrupting something far more important than discussing the most significant project in our company's history. Sarah, we've been through this before, he said, his tone suggesting that my question was somehow inappropriate. Marcus has the kind of executive presence that Fortune 500 companies expect. He understands how to navigate complex corporate environments. What does that mean exactly? I pressed, my patience finally beginning to wear thin. Can you give me specific examples of skills or experiences that make him more qualified for this role? Rick stood up and walked to his window, gazing out at the Denver skyline as if the answer might be written in the clouds. When he turned back to face me, his expression had shifted from irritation to something that looked almost like pity. Sarah, let's be honest here. Women just don't belong in high-stakes business. It's nothing personal, it's just biology. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Men are naturally better suited for the kind of aggressive decision-making and risk-taking that these situations require. You're excellent at execution and supporting roles, but leadership at this level requires a different kind of mindset. The words hung in the air like toxic smoke, poisoning everything they touched. I stared at him in stunned silence, trying to process the fact that my boss had just reduced 5 years of exceptional performance to a biological deficiency. The quarterly reports in my hands suddenly felt like evidence in a trial where the verdict had already been decided. Are you seriously suggesting that my gender disqualifies me from strategic leadership? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I'm stating a fact about how business works at the highest levels, he replied, with the confidence of someone who'd never questioned his own assumptions. Clients want to work with leaders who inspire confidence. And, unfortunately, that's just not something women can provide in the same way men can. It's not fair, but it's reality. I stood there absorbing the full impact of his words, feeling something fundamental shift inside me, like tectonic plates rearranging themselves before an earthquake. 5 years of dedication, innovation, and superior results had just been dismissed because of characteristics I'd been born with, rather than talents I'd developed through relentless effort and continuous learning. The conversation ended with Rick suggesting that I focus on becoming the best supporting player I could be, emphasizing how valuable my contributions were to the team's overall success. He spoke about my future at Summit in terms of helping others achieve their potential rather than reaching my own, painting a picture of professional purgatory, where excellence would be acknowledged but never rewarded with the opportunities it deserved. I walked back to my desk in a daze, passing colleagues who were already discussing the Titan Technologies project with the excitement of people who believed merit-determined outcomes. My computer screen displayed an email from Tom Bradley, praising the latest campaign results for his company, unaware that the person responsible for his success had just been told she was biologically unsuited for leadership roles. That afternoon, I sat in my car in the parking garage beneath our building, staring at the concrete walls and trying to decide what came next. I could accept Rick's assessment and spend the rest of my career watching less qualified men receive opportunities I'd earned through superior performance. I could transfer to another agency and hope that the next set of decision-makers would judge me based on results rather than chromosomes. Or I could do something that terrified and exhilarated me in equal measure. For the first time in 5 years, I drove home before 6 o'clock, my mind already beginning to formulate a plan that would either vindicate everything I'd worked for or destroy my career in spectacular fashion. Either way, I was done accepting other people's limitations on my potential, done pretending that biology trumped ability in determining who deserved success. The decision crystallized as I sat in my apartment overlooking Cherry Creek, watching the sun set behind the Rocky Mountains. Rick Thompson had just made the most expensive mistake of his professional life, and I was going to make sure he understood exactly what it cost him. The war for my professional dignity was about to begin, and I intended to win it on terms that would leave no doubt about who belonged in high-stakes business. The documents were hidden in plain sight, filed under Strategic Planning 2024, in the shared drive that everyone at Summit had access to but nobody ever bothered to explore. I discovered them 3 weeks after Rick's pronouncement about women in business, while searching for budget allocations for a client presentation. What I found instead was a detailed roadmap for my professional elimination, complete with timelines and transition plans. The first document outlined a, quote, leadership restructuring initiative that would gradually transfer all my major accounts to Marcus over the next 18 months. Each client relationship I'd built was categorized by revenue potential and strategic importance, with detailed notes about how to position the transitions as natural progressions rather than demotions. My name appeared throughout the document, but only as someone whose responsibilities would be quote 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 quote. Marcus was referenced as Summit's strategic lead from the very first conversation, despite the fact that he'd never worked on a project even remotely comparable in scope or complexity. The emails revealed that Rick had specifically marketed our agency's capabilities based on Marcus's executive potential and, quote, fresh perspective on digital transformation. The third document nearly made me physically sick. It was a performance evaluation template with my name at the top, pre-filled with ratings that painted me as competent but lacking leadership qualities essential for senior roles. The evaluation criticized my communication style as too detailed, and my strategic thinking as overly focused on tactics rather than vision. Most damning was a section titled Growth Potential that concluded I had reached my natural ceiling in terms of strategic responsibilities. I printed everything, my hands shaking as the pages emerged from the office printer at 9:30 on a Thursday night when the building was empty except for security guards and cleaning crews. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. A paper trail that exposed not just bias but deliberate professional sabotage. Rick hadn't simply passed me over for opportunities. He'd actively engineered a future where those opportunities would never exist for me again. That weekend, I called Jennifer Walsh, my former roommate from business school, who now practiced employment law in downtown Denver. We met at a coffee shop in Cherry Creek, far enough from Summit's offices to avoid accidental encounters with colleagues. Jennifer spread the documents across a corner table, while I explained the context behind each revelation. "This is textbook discrimination," she said after reviewing everything twice. "The biological determinism comment alone would be sufficient for a lawsuit, but these documents show systematic planning to limit your advancement based on gender bias." "What kind of case would we have?" I asked, already knowing that legal vindication wouldn't restore the career momentum I'd lost or the opportunities that had been stolen. "Strong enough to win, probably strong enough to force a significant settlement," Jennifer replied. "But litigation takes years, and even if you win, it won't give you back the professional relationships or industry reputation that these actions have damaged." I stared out the window at shoppers browsing the outdoor mall, people pursuing their Saturday afternoon plans without the weight of professional betrayal crushing their shoulders. The legal path offered justice but not restoration, vindication but not advancement. It would mark me as someone who sued her employer, regardless of how justified the action might be. "There's another option," Jennifer continued, lowering her voice even though we were surrounded by strangers. "Use this documentation to protect yourself while you build something better. Start your own agency. Take your expertise and client relationships with you. Show the industry what you're really capable of when you're not being held back by someone else's limitations." The idea terrified and energized me simultaneously. Starting an agency required capital, connections, and clients, none of which seemed readily available to someone whose boss had spent months undermining her professional reputation. But as I thought about the alternative, continuing to work for Rick while watching Marcus receive credit for my innovations, the risk of entrepreneurship seemed less daunting than the certainty of professional stagnation. That night, I created a spreadsheet that would become my roadmap to independence. The first column listed every client I'd managed at Summit, along with contract expiration dates and renewal timelines. The second column detailed the specific results I'd delivered for each account, quantifying the value I'd created in terms they could understand and verify. The third column contained contact information for decision-makers who knew my work personally, people who might be willing to follow their trusted strategist to a new agency. The analysis revealed patterns I hadn't fully appreciated before. 70% of my clients had contracts expiring within the next 8 months, presenting natural transition opportunities that wouldn't require poaching or unethical solicitation. Most of these decision-makers had worked with me for over 2 years, building trust and rapport that extended beyond their relationships with Summit as an institution. Several had explicitly credited my strategies with transforming their business outcomes in ways that previous agencies had failed to achieve. Tom Bradley emerged as the most promising potential anchor client. His company, Neurotech Solutions, was developing brain-computer interface technology for medical applications, and their upcoming Series C funding round would require sophisticated marketing support that extended far beyond traditional campaign management. Tom had frequently mentioned his frustration with Summit's account management structure, specifically the disconnect between the strategic brilliance of my work and the superficial relationship management provided by senior leadership. I spent the following week crafting an approach that would test the waters without violating my employment agreement or burning bridges prematurely. During my regular check-in call with Tom, I asked open-ended questions about his long-term marketing needs and timeline for scaling their outreach efforts. His responses confirmed what I'd suspected. He was planning to evaluate new agency partnerships after their funding round closed, dissatisfied with Summit's inability to provide the kind of visionary leadership his rapidly growing company required. "The challenge isn't finding agencies that can execute campaigns," Tom explained during our conversation. "It's finding strategic partners who understand our technology well enough to communicate its potential to investors, patients, and healthcare providers. We need someone who can grow with us rather than just managing our current needs." What would that kind of partnership look like? I asked, trying to sound professionally curious rather than personally invested. Honestly, Sarah, it would look a lot like working with you directly rather than going through Summit's bureaucracy, he said with a candor that caught me off guard. You're the only person at that agency who really understands our mission and can translate complex technical concepts into compelling narratives. If you ever decided to start your own firm, we'd be your first client. The conversation ended with Tom asking me to think about what an ideal agency partnership might look like from his perspective, supposedly to help him evaluate future vendor relationships. But his subtext was clear. He was offering me an opportunity to define the terms of our professional relationship, rather than accepting whatever structure someone else imposed. That evening, I began developing the business plan that would eventually become Catalyst Marketing Group. The name reflected my conviction that effective marketing should accelerate business growth rather than simply supporting existing operations. I envisioned an agency built around deep industry expertise and strategic innovation, where client success was measured in transformational outcomes rather than incremental improvements. The financial projections were challenging but not impossible. My personal savings could cover startup costs for approximately 6 months, assuming minimal overhead and aggressive client acquisition. Tom's account alone would generate enough revenue to sustain basic operations while I built additional client relationships. Within 12 months, if I could land 3 accounts comparable to Neurotech Solutions, the agency would be profitable and positioned for sustainable growth. The legal structure required careful consideration, particularly regarding non-compete clauses and client solicitation restrictions in my Summit employment agreement. Jennifer helped me understand the boundaries, identifying strategies for building client relationships that wouldn't violate contractual obligations or expose me to litigation risks. The key was positioning myself as an available resource for clients who chose to work with me independently, rather than actively recruiting them away from Summit. My resignation letter took 3 days to perfect, each word chosen to maintain professionalism while creating maximum strategic impact. I dated it for a Friday afternoon, timing my departure to create weekend disruption while giving me a clean break from the emotional complexity of extended farewells. The letter thanked Rick for the learning opportunities while expressing my intention to pursue entrepreneurial challenges that better aligned with my professional aspirations. I delivered the letter at 4:30 on a Friday afternoon in November, walking into Rick's office with the confidence of someone who'd finally stopped seeking approval from people who would never provide it. He read the single page twice before looking up with an expression that mixed surprise with something approaching panic. "This seems sudden," he said, his voice lacking its usual authoritative tone. "Is this about the Titan Technologies project? Because we can discuss other opportunities for you to contribute strategically." "It's about building something better than what exists here," I replied, keeping my tone respectful but final. "I'm grateful for everything I've learned, but I'm ready for challenges that match my capabilities." "Sarah, let's be practical about this," Rick continued, leaning forward in his chair like he was negotiating a deal. "Starting an agency is incredibly risky, especially in this market. You have security here, a proven track record, colleagues who respect your work. Why throw that away for something so uncertain?" I almost laughed at the irony of Rick Thompson lecturing me about security and respect, given his recent assessment of my biological limitations. Instead, I stood up and extended my hand for a professional farewell. "I appreciate your concern," I said, "but I've never been afraid of proving myself through results rather than assumptions." The handshake lasted exactly 3 seconds, long enough to convey mutual respect but brief enough to signal that this conversation was over. I walked out of his office for the last time, carrying nothing except my laptop bag and the satisfaction of finally taking control of my professional destiny. Monday morning brought the first test of my entrepreneurial resolve. I woke up in my apartment without an office to report to, without colleagues to collaborate with, without the familiar rhythm of client meetings and campaign deadlines. The silence felt both liberating and terrifying, a blank canvas that could become either a masterpiece or a costly mistake. I drove to a co-working space in the Denver Tech Center, a converted warehouse where startups and freelancers shared desks, coffee machines, and the nervous energy of people building something from nothing. The environment perfectly matched my mental state: ambitious, uncertain, but committed to discovering what was possible when talent met opportunity without artificial constraints. My first task was reaching out to Tom Bradley, not to solicit his business directly, but to inform him of my career transition and availability for future consulting opportunities. The email was carefully worded to avoid any suggestion of improper client solicitation, while making it clear that I was now positioned to provide the kind of strategic partnership he'd described wanting. Tom's response arrived within 2 hours, more enthusiastic than I'd dared to hope. He wanted to schedule a lunch meeting immediately to discuss how Catalyst Marketing Group might support Neurotech Solutions' upcoming funding round and market expansion plans. His eagerness confirmed what I'd suspected. Clients followed relationships and results rather than agency names and corporate hierarchies. The lunch meeting at the Brown Palace Hotel felt like a job interview, where I was both the candidate and the hiring manager. Tom outlined his vision for scaling Neurotech Solutions from a promising startup to an industry leader, emphasizing the critical role that strategic marketing would play in achieving those ambitious goals. He described campaigns that would educate investors about the commercial potential of brain-computer interfaces while building consumer awareness of therapeutic applications. Traditional agencies approach our industry like it's just another tech company, Tom explained over dessert. They miss the emotional complexity of marketing medical devices that could literally change how people interact with the world. We need someone who understands both the science and the human impact. What would success look like for you? I asked, already formulating campaign concepts that could address his concerns. 3 primary outcomes, he said, counting on his fingers. First, investor relations materials that communicate our competitive advantages without overselling our timeline. Second, patient advocacy campaigns that build trust in our technology while managing expectations about availability. Third, healthcare provider education that positions our devices as natural extensions of existing treatment protocols. I spent the next hour outlining strategic approaches for each objective, drawing on case studies from my work with other healthcare technology companies, while adapting the concepts to Neurotech's unique challenges. Tom asked increasingly detailed questions about implementation timelines, budget requirements, and performance metrics, clearly evaluating whether I could deliver on the promises I was making. By the end of lunch, we'd agreed on a 6-month consulting contract worth $120,000, with performance bonuses tied to specific fundraising and awareness milestones. The retainer was enough to sustain my new agency while building additional client relationships, providing the financial foundation I needed to compete with established firms like Summit Marketing Solutions. Tom's enthusiasm extended beyond our business relationship. He offered to introduce me to other executives in Denver's healthcare technology ecosystem, specifically mentioning 3 companies that were dissatisfied with their current marketing support. These referrals would accelerate my client acquisition timeline while establishing credibility within a specialized industry where relationships determined opportunities. The second major breakthrough came through an unexpected source. David Kim, a venture capitalist I'd met at industry networking events, reached out after hearing about my transition to independent consulting. His portfolio included several technology companies that needed sophisticated marketing support but couldn't afford the premium rates charged by large agencies. David proposed a partnership structure where Catalyst Marketing Group would provide strategic consulting to his portfolio companies in exchange for equity stakes and reduced cash fees. Most marketing agencies treat startups like smaller versions of established companies, David explained during our meeting at his offices in Cherry Creek. They apply the same strategies and expect similar results, ignoring the fundamental differences in resources, timelines, and risk tolerance. We need someone who understands how to build brands from scratch, rather than just managing existing ones. The portfolio included 8 companies in various stages of development, from pre-revenue startups to profitable firms preparing for acquisition or public offerings. Each company presented unique marketing challenges that would require creative solutions and measurable results. The equity arrangements meant that successful outcomes would generate long-term value beyond immediate consulting fees, aligning my interests with client success in ways that traditional agency relationships couldn't match. Within 6 weeks of leaving Summit, I'd secured contracts worth over $300,000 in annual revenue, with additional equity positions that could prove far more valuable if the portfolio companies achieved their growth projections. The financial foundation was solid enough to hire additional team members and lease proper office space, transforming Catalyst Marketing Group from a consulting practice into a legitimate agency. Meanwhile, Summit Marketing Solutions was struggling with the consequences of my departure. Marcus Johnson had assumed responsibility for my former accounts, but the transition was revealing gaps in his understanding of complex campaign strategies and client relationships. Tom Bradley later told me that Marcus had scheduled 3 separate meetings to review campaign concepts that I'd developed months earlier, asking basic questions about implementation details that demonstrated his superficial grasp of the underlying strategies. The Titan Technologies project, which had been positioned as Marcus's opportunity to prove his leadership capabilities, was encountering significant challenges. The client had expressed frustration with campaign concepts that relied heavily on industry buzzwords without demonstrating deep understanding of their business objectives. When Titan CMO requested detailed explanations of proposed strategies, Marcus struggled to provide satisfactory answers, eventually admitting that he needed additional time to research their market dynamics. Rick Thompson began reaching out to former clients, attempting to rebuild relationships that had been damaged by inadequate account management following my departure. Several clients had already begun evaluating alternative agencies, citing concerns about Summit's ability to provide the strategic leadership they required for upcoming campaigns. The reputation that Rick had built over 15 years was eroding rapidly, undermined by his decision to prioritize perceived leadership potential over demonstrated competence. The most satisfying vindication came when Tom Bradley forwarded me an email that Summit had sent to Neurotech Solutions, proposing a comprehensive marketing overhaul that would address the strategic gaps in their current approach. The proposal included campaign concepts that were remarkably similar to strategies I'd developed during my final months at Summit, repackaged with new terminology but fundamentally unchanged in structure and execution. "They're literally trying to sell me back my own ideas," Tom wrote in his forwarding message. "The lack of self-awareness is almost impressive." I responded with professional restraint, thanking Tom for keeping me informed while avoiding any commentary that might seem vindictive or unprofessional. But privately, I felt a deep satisfaction knowing that Rick Thompson was reduced to plagiarizing strategies from the woman he'd declared biologically unsuited for strategic leadership. By spring, Catalyst Marketing Group had grown to include 4 full-time employees and occupied a suite of offices in a converted warehouse in the River North Art District. The space reflected our company culture: creative, collaborative, and focused on results rather than appearances. We'd established specialized expertise in healthcare technology marketing, with 3 major clients and a waiting list of companies seeking our services. The breakthrough moment came when Neurotech Solutions announced their successful Series C funding round, raising $47 million from investors who specifically cited their marketing strategy and brand positioning as key factors in their investment decision. Tom Bradley arranged for me to present our campaign results at the funding announcement event, providing industry-wide visibility for Catalyst Marketing Group's capabilities. The presentation generated immediate interest from other healthcare technology companies, several of which had been Summit clients before becoming dissatisfied with the service quality following my departure. Within 2 months, we'd signed contracts with 5 new clients, including 2 companies that had specifically terminated their relationships with Summit to work with us instead. Rick Thompson requested a meeting in June, ostensibly to discuss potential collaboration opportunities between our agencies. We met at a neutral location, a coffee shop in downtown Denver, where the conversation would remain private but public enough to prevent any uncomfortable emotional exchanges. "I wanted to acknowledge that I may have underestimated your entrepreneurial potential," Rick said after ordering coffee, his tone carefully modulated to sound magnanimous rather than apologetic. "I appreciate that," I replied, genuinely curious about his motivations for this conversation. "The truth is, Summit could benefit from your specialized expertise in healthcare technology marketing," he continued. "We have several clients in that space who are seeking more sophisticated strategic support than we're currently positioned to provide." I realized he was proposing a subcontracting arrangement that would allow Summit to retain clients by outsourcing the strategic work to Catalyst Marketing Group. The proposal was simultaneously flattering and insulting, acknowledging my capabilities while assuming I would be willing to work behind the scenes to preserve his agency's reputation. "That's an interesting idea," I said, buying time to consider the implications. "What would that kind of partnership look like?" "We handle client relationships and overall account management," while you provide specialized strategic consulting on healthcare campaigns," Rick explained. "It would give you access to larger clients and higher value projects while allowing us to offer services we can't match internally." The irony was overwhelming. Rick Thompson, who had declared women biologically unsuited for high-stakes business leadership, was now asking me to provide the strategic expertise that his agency lacked. He wanted to benefit from my capabilities while maintaining the illusion that Summit was providing the leadership his clients required. "I'm flattered by the opportunity," I said after a long pause. "But Catalyst has developed a client base that appreciates working directly with strategic leadership rather than through intermediary relationships. I think we're better positioned to grow independently." Rick's expression shifted subtly, revealing disappointment that he'd tried to mask with professional politeness. "The offer stands if you change your mind," he said. "Competition doesn't have to mean we can't find ways to collaborate when it benefits everyone involved." "Absolutely," I agreed, though we both understood that collaboration would only occur on terms that acknowledged Catalyst Marketing Group as an equal partner rather than a subordinate service provider. The conversation ended with polite expressions of mutual respect and professional courtesy, but the subtext was clear. Rick Thompson had finally recognized the strategic leadership capabilities he'd dismissed 18 months earlier, but his recognition came too late to benefit from the relationship he'd destroyed through his own bias and short-sightedness. 6 months later, Catalyst Marketing Group was named one of Denver's fastest-growing marketing agencies by the Denver Business Journal, with annual revenue approaching $2 million and a client roster that included some of the region's most innovative healthcare technology companies. The article quoted Tom Bradley praising our unique ability to translate complex technical innovations into compelling narratives that resonate with investors, patients, and healthcare providers. The same article mentions Summit Marketing Solutions as one of several established agencies facing increased competition from specialized boutique firms that offered more personalized service and industry expertise. Rick Thompson was quoted defending his agency's broad-based approach, claiming that, quote, "generalist agencies provide the strategic perspective that specialized firms often lack." I read the article from my office overlooking the South Platte River, surrounded by awards and client testimonials that validated everything I'd believed about my capabilities during those frustrating years of being overlooked and underestimated. The recognition felt satisfying, but what mattered more was the knowledge that I'd built something meaningful through talent, determination, and strategic thinking, rather than inherited advantages or biological determinism. The real victory wasn't just professional success or financial independence. It was the transformation from someone who accepted other people's limitations on her potential to someone who defined success on her own terms. Rick Thompson had been wrong about women in business, but more fundamentally, he'd been wrong about the relationship between leadership and biology, between strategic thinking and gender, between innovation and inherited privilege. When Jennifer Walsh called to congratulate me on the Business Journal recognition, she asked whether I ever regretted not pursuing legal action against Summit for the discrimination I'd experienced. "Sometimes I think about it," I admitted, "but building something better than what existed felt more satisfying than destroying what was already broken." "You proved your point more definitively than any lawsuit could have," Jennifer replied. Rick Thompson will spend the rest of his career explaining why his agency lost market share to someone he claimed wasn't suited for leadership. That evening, I stayed late in the office to review proposals for 3 new client relationships, each representing opportunities to apply innovative marketing strategies to challenging business problems. The work felt like what I'd always imagined professional satisfaction should be: intellectually demanding, strategically important, and directly connected to measurable outcomes that improved people's lives. As I prepared to leave, I noticed an email from Marcus Johnson requesting an informational interview about career opportunities at Catalyst Marketing Group. His message mentioned his dissatisfaction with the constraints at Summit and his interest in working with an agency that valued strategic innovation over hierarchical politics. I scheduled the meeting for the following week, curious to understand his perspective on the events that had led to our very different career trajectories. The conversation would be professional and courteous, focused on his qualifications and our company's needs, rather than past grievances or personal vindication. But as I walked to my car in the parking garage beneath our building, I couldn't help smiling at the thought of interviewing someone for a position at the company I'd built after being told that biology disqualified me from strategic leadership. The transformation was complete. From undervalued employee to successful entrepreneur, from dismissed subordinate to respected industry leader, from someone who accepted limitations to someone who defined possibilities. Rick Thompson had been right about one thing. Biology did matter in high-stakes business, but he'd misunderstood which biological traits were most important. It wasn't gender that determined leadership capability. It was the capacity for growth, adaptation, and strategic thinking that enabled some people to build something meaningful from nothing, while others struggled to maintain what they'd inherited through privilege rather than merit. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.